They're trying to help, but you got to help them help you. Help them understand what exactly you need from them, and focus their review on those points. Being too long-winded is just gonna, make everything harder.
Hello, welcome to episode 22 of FDA Watch. We're the only independent and nonpartisan national forum that deals with FDA issues. I think generally we have been very, very well received, and I'm very appreciative to all the people who have subscribed and who tune in regularly to our podcast. For those who have not subscribed, I want to remind you that you can do so right now, not while you're listening to us, but right afterwards. You go to fdawatch.net, fdawatch.net, and if you subscribe and it's free, you get an email when a new episode appears, including bonus episodes, when there's breaking news. There's been so much happening in the FDA world, and I would expect 2026 to be maybe not as dramatic as 2025, but just as active. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on the latest issue in the medical device area. We have two great guests to guide us through that discussion. You'll meet them in just a moment. First, let me get to some headlines. FDA recently outlined what it's calling a more flexible approach to CMC requirements for cell and gene therapies to better accommodate, these products, which are complex, they're individualized. It's been a whole new breakthrough area for medicine, and FDA is trying to not make it easier for companies, but to provide more flexibility for companies in terms of CMC, which will help, of course, in the development strategies. CMC is central to cell and gene therapies. The agency said there had been regulatory flexibilities in the past, but they were applied on a case-by-case basis. FDA said the intent is to reduce whatever perceived barriers exist and to align their oversight with how these therapies are made and studies, but still to maintain, of course, all standards for product quality and safety and, of course, efficacy. From the device desk, FDA published two final guidances clarifying how it will apply oversight to wearable devices and AI-enabled digital health tools, particularly to distinguish between regulated medical devices and low-risk general wellness products, which we're seeing increasingly on the market. These guidances say that non-invasive wearables and software features that promote healthy lifestyles or provide general physiologic information. Examples are heart rate, sleep rate, other health-related metrics, generally will not be subject to regulatory review if they do not claim to diagnose or treat disease. At the same time, higher risk products and AI functions that are tied to clinical decision-making or decision management remain subject to full oversight under the medical device regulatory framework. So it's important to distinguish between those products that are making claims and those that are simply providing information. From the foods desk, FDA Commissioner Marty Makary recently was on NPR's All Things Considered. He talked about the new food pyramid. You've all seen the new food pyramid. There's been a lot of publicity about it. It puts stronger emphasis on protein and other foundational foods. Has gotten a lot of publicity. Makary, in this interview, tied that updated pyramid to the agency's policy on routine childhood vaccinations. He said that the greater uptake of core childhood vaccinations actually complements with an E, the dietary guidance aimed at improving health outcomes in children. So he's tying the vaccine policy to what children eat and saying that it's part of a broader shift in federal health messaging that ties nutrition and preventive care together in promoting childhood well-being. We're going to link to this podcast on fdawatch.net. So If you want to hear it, you can go to fdawatch.net and you can see a link to that podcast. Very interesting podcast, well worth listening to, especially with regard to the point I just made with regard to tying vaccines and nutrition together in terms of childhood health. Finally, from the cosmetics death, a congressman from Texas, Randy Weber, recently introduced the Packaging and Claims Knowledge Act, the PAC Act, P-A-C-K. It's a bill intended to create the first voluntary federal standard for environmental claims on product packaging to reduce confusion among consumers from inconsistent state regulations. The legislation would allow companies to make environmental claims such as recyclable, compostable, reusable, only if they're scientifically validated and recognized by existing recycling or composting programs. The aim is to have transparency without new mandates, but we see in other areas of FDA regulation inconsistency between federal rules and state rules. I think that that's going to get more intense as time goes by. So we'll keep an eye on this bill as it makes its way through the Congress. Now let's meet our guests. Mike Ryan. Mike recently joined Eloquent as an executive vice president after 21 years at FDA and CDRH. He was a reviewer. He was a division director, a policy leader. He reviewed hundreds of submissions. He shaped key guidances, very influential within CDRH. And he is well known for championing innovation in areas of unmet patient needs. Welcome to FDA Watch, Mike. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Michael Gaba is the Food and Drug Vice Chair at Paulson-Ellie. He has been on FDA Watch before, and he has more than 30 years of experience in FDA regulations, on Medicare policy, federal relations, and on medical devices. Covers the whole broad spectrum, not only medical devices, but also in the drug area. And of course, Paulson-Ellie is a leading law firm in this area. So welcome back, Michael, to FDA Watch.
Thank you for having me back, Wayne.
And we're going to call Michael Gaba Michael, and we're going to call Mike Ryan Mike. So there's no misunderstanding as to who's speaking. So let's dive right in. I want to start out with Mike Ryan. From your vantage points, what are you seeing the potential issues being faced by FDA and industry on device regulatory issues? Where's your take on what's going on now as we start at the beginning of 2026?
Yeah, it's a big question, and so I'll focus on a couple of things. I think it's for all of us who work with the FDA and have been paying attention over the last year. I think the biggest thing personally is really just the number of people in different positions and the number of people who've left the agency. A lot of people at every level of the agency have moved away from the FDA or have moved within the FDA. And it remains to be seen what that does with the agency and CDRH over the long run. There are people who are learning new positions. There are new managers who are trying to coach, reviewers and try to adapt to new policies. And all of that, it lends a little bit of unpredictability into the interactions that we all have with the agency. And it stretches some people thin. It stretches CDRH in general thin. And so I worry a little bit about the brain drain. I think it's real. And I think it's going to have real impacts on all of us who work with the agency.
Michael?
Yeah, I agree with what Mike just said. I think that the brain drain, the reduction in force is likely to have real impacts. I know from recent experience that reviewers at CDRH are hustling much harder as a result, I think. I've seen a couple of different reviewers now working over weekends and really hustling to make their internal deadlines, because these are all very relevant for funding purposes through the User Fee Acts. I feel like what I'm experiencing is that the reviewers are working overdrive to try to meet their deadlines, to keep their funding levels up. And I'll just say the other comment I have is that to your earlier point, Wayne, about what's going on in the device world, there's been a number of recent guidances, all of which I think trend in the direction of trying to reduce the regulatory burden for industry. So the expectations go higher as far as the ability to get through the agency faster. You've got the review teams and the career people who are really trying hard to ensure that they are applying the standards that have not changed, which is to ensure that these devices are safe and effective for their intended use.
Do you see a difference? I'll start with Mike again, in the factors that the reviewers take into account when they're reviewing a submission. Has there been a change in any standards? And the second part of that question is, how should companies react to the new reality of FDA with, as you said, fewer reviewers, people working much harder at FDA, and of course the other changes that are taking place in AI and other changes that are independent of anything that's particularly going on at FDA. So, Mike, I know that's a complex question, but again, just to reiterate it, is there any change in the review process, and how should companies react?
Yeah, overall, there is not a change in the review process. I think Michael just pointed out that there's a human element to this. You've got people at the agency that you're corresponding with, and they are working as hard as they can to meet their deadlines and to get through the review work in front of them. But in some ways, the seams are starting to show a little bit. Some teams are stretched a little bit thin. Some teams may be missing medical officers that they'd come to rely on. Some are missing managers that were really helpful in, keeping everything moving and keeping the decisions consistent. And so there are, individual cases where I think you're seeing differences, but the overall process is the same. CRH has said in a couple of different places, they've, very proudly and rightfully so, that they're still meeting their MDUFA goals, their review deadlines for the most part. But you can see some of those numbers starting to creep the wrong way in terms of meeting those goals. So I think, going back to the human element of this, my advice for people working with the FDA is to remember that they are corresponding with people. And that brings, there are a lot of things to consider in that. How you work with those people is important. The way you work with them, understanding that there are differences in different review teams. They're all going to have their specialties and their scientific medical backgrounds. And some will need to be educated on the product, the device that you're working with them on. Some will know exactly what you're trying to do in some areas. Some won't. There are reviewers that are trying to learn AI, for instance. There are only so many people at the agency who have, deep expertise in how AI works. And so there may be need to educate, but, don't lose sight of the fact that you're talking with human beings who are, they're trying their best to work with you.
Michael?
Yeah, I think that's right. I agree with what Mike has said. And I would add that the way I have been functioning for many years dealing with the agency is I think of, when it comes to getting a product through the agency, I think of it as sort of one large negotiation, trying to get to yes with the reviewers. And as Mike said, remember, these are people, they're human beings. They all come with different personalities and approaches. And I think given what we've already discussed about the fewer staff available to do these reviews and the folks that are there under greater pressure, we should expect that the communications are briefer, to the point, and you have to be careful not to misread what they're telling you. So I think for stakeholders who are trying to get products through, I would say try to be a bit more patient. That may seem antithetical to what I'm saying, but while the reviewers are trying to move faster and are briefer in their communications because they just want to keep moving, don't misinterpret that and stay calm. That would be my advice.
Yeah. Mike, you and Michael both know a lot of people at CDRH, so I'll ask you a question that I know there's no precise answer to. But is the brain drain over, or is it stable, or will we continue to see more people leaving CDRH, more of the experts, and to the extent that they're replaced obviously by people who have less background and less expertise. But have we gone through the brain drain and now we're in a stable position, or will we see more in 2026?
Yeah, I'd be interested for Michael's thoughts. From what the people who I talk to and the people who I remain close with at the agency, it's not over, unfortunately. I hope we're through the worst of it, but the condition that with so many people leaving, it creates a tougher condition where there are fewer people to do the same amount of work. There's less. There have been a lot of senior people who have stepped away, which makes it harder to keep everybody on the same page. It makes it harder to keep organized and to keep consistent. And so it makes it even tougher on the people who are still there to keep going and to keep the same camaraderie and culture that CDRH has had for a long time. I think for a long time CDRH has had a really good culture, and this is morale's low, unfortunately. And until more people come on and come up to speed and they really figure out how to work with the new, administration and the new policies that are in place, I think we're still going to see some people who are looking around and maybe headed out.
Yeah. Michael, what do you hear?
Yeah, I similar to what Mike is hearing. I think that part of the problem is that it's not just a headcount issue. There's a multiplier effect when you think about the institutional knowledge that's walked out of the building. That has a real impact on the ability of those remaining to do their job. I do think the lion's share of career people that are still at the FDA, whether it's at the Center for Devices or Drugs or Biologics, they're all very mission driven. So I think they're very committed to trying to see through this time period and stay with the job. And my advice to them has been, keep your chin up and your head down and just keep trying to move forward. So it's hard to tell if there's going to be further designed reductions in force like we saw going back to this past April. But I do think, to Mike's point, some people are just going to get burnt out and are going to say enough is enough and move on, which is unfortunate for the agency and it's unfortunate for our public health.
Yeah, what you're both saying is consistent with what I've been hearing as well. I was just at an event of the FDA Alumni Association, and everybody's talking about what's going on at the agency and what's happened, in the past year. And it appears as if, as you both said, it may not be over, and we have a workforce that is working very, very hard and maintains its commitment, but that continues to be, subject to a lot of pressures that previously didn't exist. So we'll keep an eye on it in 2026. Want to shift gears, Mike. There's a new acronym in town, TPLC, Total Product Lifecycle Considerations. It's a foundational element to CDRH. Please explain briefly what TPLC is, what Total Product Lifecycle Considerations means, why it's important, and how it affects sponsors.
Yeah, great question. I think the important word in that term, total product life cycle, the one that's doing a lot of lifting is life cycle. The idea is that, CDRH used to have, silos in terms of, pre-market, didn't talk to post-market, compliance enforcement actions were done without any knowledge of the people who were approving and clearing the devices that, post-market enforcement actions were being taken on. And so it created problems. I remember clearly one case where I was in a division management place and I signed a 510K letter clearing a 510K for market. And I got an email from our Office of Compliance a couple hours later saying, you just busted up this enforcement case that we've been working on for 6 months. What did you do? And I had no idea. Neither one of us had any idea that the other one was working on something with this same company. And so the idea here is that pre-market work feeds into the post-market work, which feeds back into the pre-market work. So a 510K gets cleared. The medical device company is monitoring for adverse events that happen. They might be conducting recalls. And if that device or a similar device comes back in with another pre-market submission, all those adverse events and recalls are part of the decision-making process on what happens in the pre-market side again. And so it's meant to make good use of all the information that's out there. And ultimately it's, I think it's worked in a couple of cases. CDRH reorganized about 7 years now along these lines to try to make use of product life cycle. And, I think they've still got some work to do, but overall, I think it's a good way to go for public health.
Is it generally working, you think? Is there a recognition of the life cycle concept within CDRH in terms of people collaborating more across not product lines, but across functional lines?
I think so. I'm a big supporter of TPLC myself, and I think as we see happening with AI, we're seeing the FDA lean on, TPLC a little bit more. They are willing to do a little bit more in the post-market space where they allow companies to monitor what's happening once they put their AI-enabled devices out in the market. They monitor what's happening post-market and they apply that learning and how they're updating and making sure their devices continue to work safely and effectively. So I think that it is generally working.
Yeah, Michael, among your clients, do you see what Mike is describing in terms of greater coordination among the various functions within CDRH? You've been involved with CDRH for a long time. So do you notice a change over the last few years?
Absolutely. I'd like to think I helped contribute to that change actually a few years back when predating the 7-year stretch that Mike was referring to of the program being in place. But I know that it helps in the framework of pushing some data requirements to the post-market setting. There was a time where in several different scenarios here, variations on this theme, where the FDA said, well, we're trying to de-risk this class 3 device. We need to know the answers to the following 10 questions. And oftentimes the sponsors would say, if we try to answer all those questions as a condition of getting to the market, we'll never get to the market, because by the time we answer all those questions, we'll be 3 generations behind the competition and our technology will be outdated. So the FDA came to recognize this fact and recognize that we know all these devices are risk-based devices, right? Low, moderate, significant risk devices. So you can never de-risk them to 0, certainly not the class 3 devices. So I think through this interchange, the agency came to learn that they could actually get answers to a lot of their questions, but not all of them necessarily, to determine that the device was in fact safe and effective for its intended use, while pushing certain ongoing data oversight and data generation requirements to the post-market setting. And I think that's been a real plus for industry because it helps strike the right balance between what you need to know to get it to the market and what you would like to know once it's on the market.
And in the last year, have you seen any change in CDRH's efforts to try to apply the life cycle concept to its regulation?
Well, I'm gonna have to defer to Mike on that one. I can't say I've seen something specific on that, but perhaps Mike is aware of something.
I don't know if there's a specific effort, but I do think that, like I was saying with AI, I think you're hearing more and more from the agency that they are interested in what's happening post-market. You look at, they've released guidance documents on the predetermined change control plans, which allow a company that's got a cleared or approved medical device to make changes without necessarily having to go back to the agency for those changes. They're allowing some things to happen based on what, post-market actions, post-market follow-up, post-market monitoring. They're they're looking more and more at real-world evidence. These are all things that are they're trying to use the information that's out there, good information that's going to help us figure out the best way to keep devices safe and effective, and have a least burdensome path for new and innovative devices.
Okay, good discussion so far. We're going to take a quick break right now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back. We're chatting with Mike Ryan from Eloquent and Michael Gaba from Paulsonelli. Michael, let me start here with you and ask you about real-world evidence, which is, of course, a topic that applies not only in the device world, but also in the drug and biologics world. FDA recently eliminated its longstanding requirement that real-world evidence submissions had to include identifiable patient-level information. They now will permit de-identified real-world evidence from large data sets, such as registries. How do you interpret this shift in terms of practical trial design and rigor, and how should sponsors think about building real-world evidence into regulatory strategies?
Yeah, it's a great question, Wayne. So it's true, it was the opportunity to utilize real-world data to generate real-world evidence was established 10 years ago through Cures. It wasn't until December of this past year through the guidance that the FDA clarified, or at least has articulated the position, as you just said, that patient-level identifiable data need not be included in the data sets, because that was the real barrier to really utilizing these data sets that were out there. So I think it creates a real opportunity for product developers. And that, by the way, that guidance was specific to medical devices, but the agency has made very clear they intend to extend that to both drugs and biologics. So we should expect that to be coming soon, certainly in the coming months, I think, during this year. What it means is that I think it opens up the opportunity for certain product developers where the data are strongest, real-world data have the opportunity strongest to leverage. So I think in the cancer space, as well as rare disease space, where there are some very well-developed longitudinal studies. So I think it depends on the product. They're also able to tap into hospital system data to the extent they can access it through agreements with those sources. There's also talk about using claims data from insurance companies. I think about the Medicare claims data as a potential source of real-world evidence. So I think what it comes down to is companies thinking through their business plan and seeing what data sources are out there to then design trials to leverage them. I think what's important to understand is they can't reverse engineer them. They have to develop their plan and then I'll say, roll the dice and see if the real world evidence that's available supports their endpoints.
Mike, real world evidence?
Yeah, I think Michael's last point about not reverse engineering data is a really important one. This, the update from FDA and CDRH certainly it does open the door to using more real world evidence. It's been a big goal of theirs for years, and this is a huge step towards realizing that goal. But they still expect, the FDA and CDRH still expect that there is a protocol and that people are looking at real world evidence with some sort of hypothesis in mind and, really testing that hypothesis, even though they're allowing for de-identified data. They still want companies to try to make sure that they're not looking at the same patient over and over again. They're not looking at duplicative data, and that it is good data. So it really behooves the companies to work with the sources and the people who they can get this data from to make sure they understand what exactly is in it. And then it's really going to help their case.
Yeah. Are the reviewers within CDRH committed to the concept of relying more on real world data, just as long as there are protocols? Because, basically the review of a product comes down to the reviewers, regardless of what the general policies are. So let me start with you, Mike, since you were most recently there. Is there a commitment among the reviewers to try to rely more on real-world evidence, or will there be pushback because of the traditional way that FDA has looked at data, and that is they want more controlled studies?
Yeah, it's a great question, Wayne. I think we've all seen that innovative policy is one thing, but implementation is often it takes time for the policy to really settle out. It takes time for people to understand how and where to really adopt it. So I think you're going to see that there are some groups, some review groups, some OHTs, Offices of Health Technology, that are fully on board and have been even part of FDA's kind of CDRH's journey to really figuring out how to use real world evidence. Some are going to be on board right away. Some are going to take a little bit of time to understand where and how it can really apply. I think there are, we talked earlier about the human element. Some people are more open and some people are a little bit more conservative about, sticking with the gold standard of, RCT trials. And it's going to take a little bit of time for them to adopt the new policy.
Yeah, Michael, among your clients, have you seen any change in the way that they are viewing the use of real-world evidence based either on what FDA came up with in terms of de-identifying the patients, or anything, the commitment by this administration toward using more real-world evidence? Are sponsors thinking differently about product development now?
I think yes, qualified by, are they in a space where where it's believed that there's robust real world data to draw upon. I think it's this, but this policy shift to move away from requiring this patient level identifiable data be included in the data sets is absolutely part and parcel of the larger effort by the agency to help expedite the development of products to get them to market in terms of the data that supports them. So clients are absolutely starting to look at this, because this change only occurred mid-December through guidance, which really sort of opens up the door in a meaningful way. The question is, I think as Mike answered and Wayne, you asked the question, I think it is going to come down to review teams. I think we should expect that more review teams than not will sort of scrub these data really hard, because it's going to be the first time many of them are seeing it as part of applications. So we may learn, I think we're going to learn as we go what really works and doesn't, as far as making that transition from the policy to to operationalizing the opportunity. So if I had to put $1 down, I'd say there are going to be more people disappointed at first about what's accepted than happy. It's just invariably, I think, because again, there's the reviewers are determined, as they should be, and the agency hasn't changed the ultimate standard of safety and efficacy. So we'll see how it plays through, but I expect it's going to be learn as we go.
Yeah, Michael, let me again shift gears and go to another acronym, TEMPO. Technology-enabled meaningful patient outcomes, the pilot in conjunction with CMS to allow certain digital health devices intended for chronic disease to be used under a risk-based enforcement discretion framework, while real-world evidence data are collected. From a legal and industry and regulatory perspective, how do you see Tempo changing the way that innovators generate evidence or engage with FDA and integrate their regulatory strategy with reimbursement pathways? Again, let me start with Michael on this.
Thank you. And this topic is fascinating to me, because I've been studying the interplay between these two agencies for 25 years. This is really, and most of the work up to now honestly hasn't gone as well as ones had hoped. I think the parallel review is one example, but I think of all the different opportunities for these agencies to collaborate, this is the first time that the collaboration involves allowing products on the market before they have the clearance. Everything else was designed to try to facilitate coordination between these agencies who have different standards for their respective roles, right? Safety and efficacy versus medically reasonable and necessary. And everything was about trying to weave those together in a way that when a product got its FDA clearance or approval, it also was already queued up and ready to go on the Medicare or insurance coverage and payment side. That has not worked very well. This is a different approach, saying FDA for specific chronic diseases that have kind of the highest spend rate around diabetes, back pain, and depression and anxiety, to use these digital health products and AI tools to see if they work and to generate real world data to evaluate if these products can be safe and effective. So it's a pilot that's designed to last 10 years. For these, there's 4 categories because it's pre-diabetes as well as diabetes. That's 2 categories: chronic back pain and, again, mental health issues around depression and anxiety. They intend to have about 10 participants for each one of these 4 categories. The FDA would exercise enforcement discretion to allow them to be on the market. And interestingly, CMS would actually cover and pay for them in this interim period as the data are developed. But the expectation, and really I'll call it a requirement, that the FDA would expect that if the data bear out that it's safe and effective, they would then seek and obtain a clearance. So it's not simply intended to be a way to test out and have something be successful and stay on the market indefinitely without the proper clearance. So it's an interesting approach to allow things to be tested first before in the real world before you have any kind of clinical data. And arguably you wouldn't have clinical data. You would have real world evidence to support product clearance or approval.
Right. Mike, any perspective on tempo?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting proposal, and I'm, like Michael, I'm really interested to see where it goes. I will note there are some strings attached, and that the FDA is expecting that companies are going to be reporting to them on some regular basis, some sort of information that's only really vaguely described in the announcement, and so these companies are going to be expected to collaborate with FDA throughout the pilot, which I think, most companies would probably take that deal. But I think it's really great to see FDA trying different things to figure out how to approach, digital health, how to, work with payers and how to make sure that there's, a facilitated path to market, not just through FDA, but through reimbursement as well. It's been a big sticking point for a lot of companies for a long time.
Again, shifting gears, I want to ask Michael about something that he and I have collaborated on in the past, and that is pre-sub meetings, pre-submission meetings, and other engagement with FDA. What is the key, from your perspective, to making the pre-sub process work to really de-risk the development process rather than create problems downstream? What's the best way to get that done?
Well, I would say it's a great question, Wayne, and what I've consistently tell clients is that the more precise you can be in the information you communicate through the pre-sub with good, solid, well thought through questions that you would like to get answered, the better the output from the agency. Recognize that the pre-sub process is held in confidence by the agency, so you can share confidential information that is not subject to FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests. And so it's to me, that's what it comes down to. So the opportunity is to not only de-risk, but streamline the clearance or approval process, because the more you can work out in advance the more likely you'll have success without a lot of hurdles to clear. The caveat I should mention, I'm sure Mike, I know Mike knows this, is that the agency is very clear to say they are not your consultant. They're not going to tell you yes or no. If you do X, Y, and Z, you will get cleared or approved. They will move you in a general direction and comment on whether they think you're on the right track, but they're never going to commit to a clearance or approval, if they through that process. But the intention is to provide you some good guidance on being on the right path and what the agency's expectations are vis-a-vis your product. I think that's it. The precision in. It's a little bit like GEICO, right? Garbage in, garbage out. The reverse is true. The better information you have to share with the agency, the more precise your plan is. What your clinical plan is to prove your product is safe and effective. The more likely you're going to get meaningful feedback from the agency.
Mike, any perspective on the pre-sub approach?
I thought those were all really good comments. I think precision is important in asking the right questions and, really thinking about where you really need FDA's help. And, the whole point of the pre-submission process, it grew out of, people have a lot of questions that they want to get FDA's input on, and they're trying to help, but you got to help them help you. Help them understand what exactly you need from them, and focus their review on those points.
Right.
Being too long-winded is just going to, make everything harder.
Yeah. Final question. Again, begin with Michael. A lot of resource constraints at FDA, a lot of changes going on. What kinds of advice do you give to your clients with regard to what they need to do in order to deal with this new environment at CDRH?
I think it gets back to being thoughtful in their planning. I do think the pre-sub meeting framework needs to be leveraged and utilized perhaps more than it is. I think a lot of stakeholders think, oh, I know how to do this. I'm going to put together a 510K application. I'm going to reference the predicate. And they wind up having a lot of holes in their applications, and even the times they get RTA's refusals to accept, meaning that the application in the first instance is incomplete, not eligible for review. So even though companies, I think, view, when you talk about another process, the pre-submission process, they think, oh my goodness, more process, more time, more cost, more energy. But I can tell you, if you do it correctly, you will save time and money on the back end. Because I think of it as the entire process. How do you, from your idea, your initial planning, through to that clearance or approval, that's the time frame they need to be keeping in mind. And I think that if you do planning both informally before you reach the agency, and then have a good, solid, formal plan at the front end, again, the more precise you can be, I think that the better your results will be sooner.
Mike, your words of wisdom?
I've always thought that everybody in industry, everybody in FDA, we're all going after the same things. Nobody gets into this field to, just to make money. We're all here to try to help patients and, doctors and nurses and everybody do their job a little bit better, treat things that are hard to treat. And so I think working, understanding that the FDA, it can sometimes seem like a painful process, but we really are trying to get to the same place. I think the more, as Michael said, you can have a well thought out approach and try to work with the agency and see that, what they're trying to do is help make sure that products are safe and they're going to do what you want them to do. That benefits everybody. Certainly, industry wants their products to be safe and to be effective. And so the more you can work with the agency, I think the better your outcome's going to be.
Right. I think those are good words of wisdom. And as we look at 2026, hopefully it'll be a year of greater stability at CDRH and throughout FDA. and sponsors will be able to have predictability and understanding with the agency and work with the remaining staff. We're going to shift gears again. We're going to turn briefly to our resource link. We provide you with some valuable links that you might want to check out. These links are included on our website, fdawatch.net. No need to write anything down. Just go to fdawatch.net and you will be able to access this information. The Pharma link, FDA published a draft guidance aimed at modernizing statistical approaches in clinical trials by the use of Bayesian methodologies as an alternative to traditional techniques. The guidance explains how Bayesian methods can be applied in trial design and analysis. This guidance received a lot of visibility, and it should, if it works, help address, as the commissioner said, help address two of the biggest problems of drug development: high costs and long timelines, clarify the way that companies should go about doing statistical analysis. We have a resource link that takes you to that draft guidance. Again, go to www.fdawatch.net. Our device link, there was an op-ed in a publication called Counterpunch. It says, FDA fails to protect Americans from the medical device industry. It says that FDA does not reliably ensure the safety and effectiveness of medical devices. It cites a Government Accountability Office report and historic examples of regulatory shortcomings. The piece concludes that systemic problems in oversight and industry influence and inadequate enforcement have left Americans vulnerable to unsafe medical devices. I suspect that all of us on this call would disagree with that, but we do have a link because we do need to monitor what people are saying, especially in the media, and it's important to understand where certain people are coming from. In the food area, January 1st of this year marked the opening of the Voluntary Qualified Importer Program. It's a voluntary fee-based program that allows approved importers of human and animal foods to receive expedited review and entry of their products into the U.S. You obviously have to meet eligibility criteria, a strong history of compliance, documented supply chain controls. You have to pay an annual user fee. What FDA says is that the program aims to reduce delays and limit routine examination or sampling at ports of entry for participating sponsors. The link on our resource page takes you to FDA's page, which explains how the process works, which lists the approved importers and provides more information about the program. And then finally, a cosmetics link. We already know that FDA said it found insufficient data to determine the safety of PFAS in cosmetics. We never linked to the official report released just before the beginning of the new year. We want to ensure that all of our listeners have quick access to the report. So that's our short and sweet resource link for cosmetics in this episode. Again, all of these links are available at fdawatch.net, which is also where, if you have not officially subscribed to our podcast, you can do so. Some people have clicked follow. They follow us, but they have not subscribed. Better to subscribe. On that note, I want to thank Mike Ryan and Michael Gaba for being such great guests. I learned a lot of very practical advice that we discussed today. Also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Evan Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. I want to remind you, if you want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor or just comment on the show, you can contact us at info@fdawatch.net, info@fdawatch.net. That's our website, fdawatch.net. I keep on repeating it because I want people to access it. You have access to all of our previous episodes as well. And if you are so inclined, You can give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does make a difference. So as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.